Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. We are coming to you the day after the season opener for Kansas football. Very happy to have Kevin Flaherty back on the show. Make sure you're checking out Kevin's stuff with KC Sports Network. Got multiple podcasts. He's got a recruiting podcast with Ryan Wallace from 24/7 Sports. He's got his other one, Pay Heed, that's more Kansas centric. So make sure you're checking those out. But really thankful that Kevin was willing to give us some of his time here. We'll keep doing these over the course of the season and discuss some Kansas football. So Kevin, we got to see KU. I wish I could say we learned a lot or saw a lot, but a lot of vanilla ice cream last night, and I am full and don't want any more.
Yeah. The coaches always talk about wanting to get players live fire reps, but last night's game was a little bit of a rubber band gun, right? In terms of, they weren't super challenged. It was a game where they were able to play a ton of guys. I was pretty impressed in the post-game presser. Lance Leipold said that they played about 75 guys. I went back and checked. I got 74. So he was pretty much right on the mark. So they were able to play a lot of guys, able to win easily. And, Swain, the second half, I think both teams were pretty content to run that clock down and get the heck out of there. So there wasn't a whole lot that we got to see there.
I wanted a camera on Lance Leipold during halftime. Did he and the Lindenwood coach meet in the back hallways and shake hands, run the clock in the second half so we can all get out of here? I'm cool with it. Before we get into the game too much here, Kevin, let's talk a little bit about playing at Sporting Kansas City.
Sure.
I thought it was really cool. I was on the sideline for a little bit pregame. First of all, if you sat out in the heat for that long, kudos to you. I know you did, Kevin, because the way the press box is set up. But I thought it was really cool. And I thought they did a really good job of making it feel intimate and feel like a college football game. And I was a little bit worried it might feel a little bit maybe closer to the spring showcase, Kevin, where it wasn't maybe as intense, much more kind of laissez-faire, laid back, and it wasn't. I thought the student section did a great job. I thought all the fans that were there made it a lot of noise. I think it was very clear that everyone's very excited for the start of the football season. And even though it wasn't really outside of a 5-minute stretch in the second quarter, it wasn't a super exciting game. There's a lot of downtime in between plays because both teams were kind of milking the clock. So I thought the fans and the atmosphere made everything really, really cool and really fun. So what'd you kind of think of things?
Yeah, like you were saying, with the way that the press box seating is, there's sort of limited seating on the inside, and then there's a spillover area where you sit outside kind of in the upper deck. And that was where I was at. And honestly, other than it being really hot, I didn't mind it because it gave me a chance to kind of feel what the atmosphere was going to be like there. And I thought the atmosphere, especially early on, was really, really good. The acoustics of Children's Mercy Park, it really carries the sound well. So when the band was playing, it was really, really loud. I thought the fans were really loud to start and everything else. Obviously, the way the game went, the energy levels weren't going to be super high over the course of the game. But no, overall, I thought it was pretty cool. I thought the field looked great. And after the game, as well as I did, the press conference, everybody talked about really enjoying playing on that surface too.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? I think, I wrote about it over the summer, but the players love the idea of there just being grass. And it's something that maybe if you're you hear about it sometimes in the NFL where the New York Jets allegedly have a really terrible turf that has caused a lot of ACL, Achilles injuries because people get it slips and then it sticks, it's inconsistent. Something that the players love is the fact that they can play it and know that their foot will be there. And the grass and the turf, I think, at Sporting is a great job. And looking at it afterwards, it didn't actually look that torn up. And that was my concern is can you play a football game on it and not have it look terrible after? Because that was the thing with the Guaranteed Rate Bowl where they played the game and then I'm walking around the field after. I'm looking at chunks of sod that are up. And you're just oh,
it looked like a war zone.
Yeah, they tore this thing up. But I thought, the turf was great. The players loved it. I think that's going to be a really underrated thing for them to stay physically in good shape because everyone talks about, hey, it is not as hard on your knees. It's not as hard on your joints. And that for some of those guys that are playing in the trenches, like that's pretty big. So I think for KU, I think you're right. Like the turf looked great, stadium looked great. And someone else that looked great, I think, is Jaylen Daniels.
Yeah.
And before we get into the game too far, Kevin, I do want to plug one thing for people.
Yeah.
We do have a 75% off sale going on for VIP. Plenty going on, right? Basketball recruiting, KU had 2 visitors on campus. Football recruiting, KU had 3 guys on campus for this one. Sounds like TCU is going to be their first kind of big weekend. So right now you can sign up 75% off. It's about $27 for the full year. If you want to look ahead, right, it gets you through football season, basketball recruiting season, football recruiting in the summer, and then all the way through next camp. So it's a great price to jump on board. Make sure you check it out at fog.net. Obviously, plenty of VIP coverage. There's myself, right? Eric Bossy does a lot of the basketball stuff with me. He dropped an interesting Darren Peterson note in our little high school basketball recruiting thread over the weekend. I say over the weekend, Kevin, we got to stop with the Thursday games. I think it's like Sunday right now, just my body clock. So not over the weekend. He dropped it yesterday, but still. So make sure you're checking that out. All right, enough of that. I'm not going to go into the Thursday game thing. But let's talk about the game, Kevin. I thought Jaylen Daniels, look, that was the thing I was most excited to see was how does he look, right? First time taking hits, first time really getting live game action that's not against your friends. I thought he looked great. Like he looked like the Jaylen Daniels we saw last year, Jaylen Daniels we saw in 2022. I was really impressed with what we saw.
Yeah, we've talked about the fact that like his game, he generates so much torque, right? With the way he twists, with the way he kind of throws with his whole body. And so for him, anybody who is worried about ill effects of the back injury or whatever else, I tried to explain to people, I think you did the same. He wouldn't have been out there at practice, throwing the ball and doing the things that he did if he was still having those issues. Even so, it was still great to see him in a game setting. I loved his comment after the game where he said, on one hand, it was nice to take a couple hits. On the other, I'm kind of trying to stay clean. So, don't want to take those hits. But, you looked at the numbers that you have up here, the 9 for 15 for 148 yards, a touchdown, and interception. The numbers, quite frankly, could have been even better because they took a couple shots on that first drive. He put one right on Quentin Skinner that wound up kind of getting broken up. The corner made a nice play, but it was a great throw, great ball, another great ball. Very next play to Luke Grimm that didn't come in, and then a little bit later he had another shot play that just didn't quite work out. But I thought he looked great throwing the ball. He looked great moving around. He didn't carry the ball a single time, which you don't need to see him carrying the ball against Lindenwood. What were your thoughts out there? You had the one mistake, but I mean, it's the opener, and it was a little miscommunication.
Yeah, that was a miscommunication. That was something I thought it was an interesting quote that he gave where he's like, look, I misread the coverage. So credit to the defensive back for, making me make that mistake. Cause I guess Luke ran the right route. Jaylen thought the coverage was one thing. So he thought Luke was going to run the coverage that's run against that instead of what he actually did. So it makes sense, right? First game of the season, knocking off the rust. I think Jaylen also had a comment about college football turning him into a pocket passer. I thought that was really interesting where he's like, I used to be a running quarterback and I used to embrace that. And he's like, now I kind of like college football has turned me into more of a guy that wants to stay clean. I just thought that was interesting and probably shows that he understands that, hey, I probably can't go out there and go scramble and go run and risk getting blown up, by a linebacker or a defensive back. So I thought that was interesting. But overall, Kevin, I mean, just the zip on the throws was there. Yeah. Everything you wanted to see, I thought was there. And that's all you can ask for in a season opener, right? I'm not expecting KU to go out there and start running option or running any sort of the read stuff for Jaylen. I think this was a game where you're going to see him throw the ball a lot, and I thought the throws he made were really good. There were a couple of it you're just like, wow, this is the guy that I think everyone, locally, nationally gets you excited to watch. So I thought he was great. What'd you think of just the offensive play calling overall? That was something I really was interested to see. I thought Jeff Grimes actually maybe was even a little bit more creative than I thought. I thought it was I thought some of the things we saw, like some of the, jet motions, some of the tosses. I wasn't really even expecting we'd see that. So I thought that was interesting that, KU felt good enough to show those things.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I know we both play college football or whatever, and they describe the Kansas offense as quote unquote multiple, and it was incredibly multiple last night. Even while staying relatively vanilla, right? Like
Yeah.
you had your spread stuff where you spread out the field. He gave wide receivers a lot of chances to make plays, and you could sense that excitement out of them in the preseason, that they were excited for kind of the way the offense was going. But then, Swain, you also had times when they had 4 tight ends on the field
Right.
all at once. And so they showed a lot of different looks without really giving too much away. And like you said, there was maybe a little bit more creativity than I would have thought. If you were trying to say, hey, he ran jet sweep, at Baylor, who's going to be the first guy to get a jet sweep carry? It was Doug Emilion. I'm not sure I would have bet on Doug Emilion to be the first jet sweep carry guy, but no, I'm really interested to see what it looks like against Illinois, because like I said, he did show kind of the basics, or the foundation of a lot of different things in this one.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, the jet sweep stuff is really interesting because then once you see it for the first time, and maybe you feel differently, Kevin, but like I saw it with Doug, then all of a sudden, every single time they started in motion in my head, I'm like, oh, are they going to do it again? Oh, are they going to do it again? And you can think about for a defense what that's like, where then in your own head, you're like, all right, so now you got to watch side to side, then, then it's in front of you. And then all of a sudden people are behind you because KU's running deep routes. So I thought that was really, really interesting. I thought the way that they were running the ball, right? Some of the tosses, I was like, oh, feels like I'm watching a Les Miles team now. Just quarterback gets ball, toss to running back. Okay, dude, go make a play. But I thought that was an interesting thing as well. And obviously, I think everyone expects there's going to be a lot more creativity, right, when KU goes on the road next week. But even just the amount of like multiple sets, right? Torrey Loughlin going to wide receiver, and then you had one play where like Jaylen went out wide, and they did then the Wildcat. Like there's just a lot of different stuff, and that in my own head now is making me think, man, if this was them being vanilla, what does it look like when they actually try and get creative? So I thought that was just an interesting dynamic there of the way that they handled it. Because look, I don't believe Lance Leipold saying everything's on the table in this game. Everything is not on the table. That was like there was not a lot of actual creativity, but just a lot of different personnel sets in the way that I think they used them. So it's to be expected in a season opener, but I just thought even so, we got some stuff that you're like, that looks different. We didn't see KU do that last year.
Yeah, and that was maybe my biggest question heading in, right? Is when you look at like Oklahoma State, for example, right? They've had a number of offensive coordinators over the years, but it's been Oklahoma State's offense. It's been a little bit different for, Dana Holgorson's a little bit different than, Casey Dunn or Larry Fedora or whatever else. But for the most part, it's Oklahoma State's offense. I was interested to see if this was, the Kansas offense that Jeff Grimes calls just a little bit differently than Andy Kotelnicki, or if it was going to be more wholesale changes. And while they did do some stuff, obviously, that they had done under Kotelnicki, I do think there was maybe a little more variance in what they did than maybe I would have thought.
Yeah, exactly. And I just look, we don't have to sit here and talk about vanilla offense for an hour, but I just think it's interesting when you think about next week. That's it.
Yeah.
Just really interested. Really interested.
You showed a lot of looks, right? Like a lot of looks that Illinois now has to practice for, but you showed a lot of looks without really showing a lot of what you would do out of those looks. And so maybe the best of both worlds, right?
Yeah, and maybe you think about it like great analogy. You compare something to an onion. It's got different layers, but it's like that, where you can continually add stuff onto it. And you've got such an experienced team, and Jeff Grimes has talked about this, that they're able to get more in depth with some things. And because these guys can handle it, right? It's not like a bunch of redshirt freshmen and sophomores who are like, okay, I just got to remember the play. And now they're like, okay, well, we can do combo, routes where guys have options and stuff. And I just think that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Switching to defense, Kevin. Look, I think I think KU looked like they should against Lindenwood.
Yep.
Over, a whole heck of a lot more athletic, a lot more physical. And it's just what you expect a defense that has the potential, if everything goes right, to be top middle, maybe top third of the Big 12. If things really, really go well at some spots, like I think it's just what you'd expect out of a defense that returns so much and that has the ability, if everybody plays to their ceiling, that they can be a really good defense this year. So I thought everything that you saw was just super encouraging from them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the physicality because it doesn't necessarily show up on the stat sheet like from an individual player standpoint, but I thought the defensive tackles were excellent last night. You look at previous KU openers and it seems like a lot of times, FCS teams haven't always struggled to run the ball on Kansas. And last night that was not there. Any success that they had running the ball was away from the middle of the defense. I thought DJ Withers was terrific. I thought Tommy Dunn had some really nice plays.
Yeah.
And man, they rotated through about 85 of those guys in there. Blake Harold was in there. Ronald McGee was in at defensive end, actually. And so, and with Caleb Taylor being out, I'm not sure I expected them to go quite that deep at defensive tackle, but Marcus Calvin was in. They played a lot of those guys, and they had pretty much all of them had levels of success. And it kind of cracks me up because on the Dean Miller sack, it could have been Jeremy Robinson, who was there a half second later, or it could have been DJ Withers, who was there at about the same time. Later, Dean Miller got kind of a hurry where he submarined the quarterback, and Tommy Dunn, I think, was the guy that got there and kind of took him out up top as Dean Miller got there below. And so having the defensive tackles chip in with the pass rush in addition to helping, against the run, that was one of the position groups that I was most interested to see, and I thought they held up really well.
Yeah, I loved oh man, who was I think it was Marcus Calvin. Also, the jerseys are really hard to see sometimes, the numbers, just because they, sometimes they move them up. So it was either 56 or 58. But I think it was Marcus Calvin. I think Jamie Robinson had like the quarterback coming down, and Marcus just like jumps on top, and then he gets up trying to like celebrate. Like, nope, that is not your half sack right there, Marcus. But you're right.
That was like a whole team sack. I mean, Robinson got him, but like the pocket just sort of closed, and Robinson was the guy that got him. But yeah, I mean, it was. The quarterback had nowhere to go. I mean, he just got shut in the closet, basically.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think the defensive tackle, I think that's a group that is going to continue to rotate. I thought it was really interesting that those guys, I think Tommy and DJ played the first couple, I wouldn't say series, but the first couple successive first downs. Yep. And they didn't really rotate until midway through the first quarter. And for me, I thought, that's interesting because typically it's been 3 plays rotate. I think KU didn't want to give Lindenwood an extra excuse to run the clock early. So they're like, Tommy and DJ, you guys are going to play a bunch right now, and then the rest of the game, you'll be good. And I thought they looked good. Look, I've been a Dean Miller skeptic going back to, his first 2 years in the program. This camp turned me around on it. And man, I thought he looked really good as well. He looked what you'd expect a Big 12 starting defensive end to look like. More athletic. He was able to get off the edge. He got a couple pressures. I can actually pull Pro Football Focus numbers here in a second, but I thought Dean looked really, really good. And that was the guy I wrote about it pregame, but I was like, that's a guy I want to see come out and just look like you are the best defensive end on the field. And yeah, he finished with 4 pressures. So I thought he really looked the part, and that's really encouraging for KU because the last thing you wanted to have happen, right, is there be all this talk about Dean, and then he comes out and he can't get off the edge and he can't pressure the quarterback against Lindenwood. And then you're like, uh-oh, that's not good. Whereas now you're like, okay, cool. He did what he should against Lindenwood if you're a Big 12 starter. And now we get to see it against Illinois next week.
Yeah, as weird as it sounds, the thing that you're most worried about with him is holding up against the run, right? I mean, it has been his entire career. How's the size going to work out? He's been able to to maintain the weight, and all of those things were good. And I thought he fared pretty well against the run last night. But where you really wanted to see him stand out was, hey, it's 3rd and 8. You're not sure where Kansas's pass rush is going to come from this year. Is this a dude that can buzz the edge and have an impact? And he was absolutely that last night.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was encouraging. Look, Cornell Wheeler's another guy. I think I talked about this in my solo podcast I did during the week, but I just love Cornell's story. It's so great. It's the opposite of what I think a lot of college football is these days. Guy transfers, right, to go somewhere else, right, leaves Michigan, gets to KU, is probably thinking, hey, it's KU. I'll play.
Yeah.
Right? Rich Miller takes over that spot. He's got to really work to improve and work to get better in a lot of different areas. He goes from special teams to then he's got to earn reps on defense, and he just stays the course and knows that if he stays, he's got 1 year to play. And he sticks through it because he likes KU. He likes everything around the program. And all of a sudden now he's team captain, starting middle linebacker. He's got the little green dot, right? So he's got the microphone in his helmet. And he goes out there and I thought looked like one of the more athletic middle linebackers I've seen KU have in a very long time, which is super encouraging.
Yeah, I know you bring this up all the time, and Kansas as a program, but I feel like especially on defense, they've got sort of an ideal development plan, right? Where it's you come in, and obviously Cornell Wheeler didn't come in as a true freshman, but still came in as a relatively young guy. Yeah. You come in, you learn the system, you bide your time, maybe you play on special teams, then you work your way into the rotation where you're getting your feet wet and everything else. And then you come out on the other end. And I think that's most apparent with the defensive tackle group. When you look at, that's been very linear for those guys. And that's worked out really well under Jim Panagos. But Cornell Wheeler is another great example of that, a guy that kind of followed the path. And like you said, that was a great point that you don't see that as much in college football anymore. Guys, when they transfer somewhere where they think they're going to play and they don't play, they're out of there. They're going to the next opportunity. They aren't necessarily sticking around and working. And I think one of the things the staff does so incredibly well, one, they're so relationship based, but two, there's always that level of communication. How many times this offseason did we hear players or the coaches talk about, well, we had to have hard conversations with this guy where we told him, you're not going to play until XYZ happens. And I think their openness and their willingness to have that discussion, and the players that they're bringing into the program, their willingness to hear and then try and do X, Y, and Z, I think it bodes really well for them, not just this year with guys like Cornell Wheeler, but in the future too.
Yeah, it's like it's a pretty simple question. Do you want to be coached hard?
Yeah.
Right? Do you want us to push you? If so, then this is the right place for you. Because, I mean, Kevin, you've been around practice during camp. Like, you see it. Coaches get on you. Like, I think one of the things I loved watching last night was DK McDonald on the sideline. I mean, I thought Jordan Peterson was a fired up type of guy. I mean, he makes Jordan Peterson look like a saint, Like, I think there was KU had to burn a timeout because they were moving to a nickel package and Marvin Grant was slow getting off the field because they didn't communicate well. And just DK just lit into the defense for like, guys, you got to communicate, right? And you're like, oh, dang. And then there's the OJ Burroughs pick where he almost got it. That was a great play. I don't care if his feet were out of bounds. It was a great play. And DK, first thing he does is run to the ref like, that's a catch. And just like lays into him for a second. And you're just like, that's like that type of intensity, holding guys accountable, but also having their back when they do make a play. I think that encapsulates everything that I think this coaching staff wants to be about. I think you see it at every spot where they're willing to get on guys because they know they can do better. And I think the players really appreciate that honesty where it doesn't feel like it's either too far where it's mean and like just you're being I almost said bad word on podcast. You're being a dick, or you're playing, or it's the other way around, and you're not actually pushing them to be better. So I think you're right. Like Dean Miller, right, having the heart-to-heart with Lance Leipold. Someone like Cornell Wheeler, I think, has definitely had that with Chris Simpson at top, in the past, where it's like, hey man, you got to do this to get better. and to be able to play here. And if you want to be coached hard, you'll embrace it because you know that's what's going to lead you to playing time. And so I think it's really, this defense is cool because you look up and down and there's so many stories about that, right? Like Caleb Taylor didn't play, but he's one as well. Hey man, you want to play here, you got to put on the weight and hold the weight.
Yep.
Or, you think about other guys in the secondary. Hey, you got to be better tacklers if you're going to play here. And so I think top to bottom, like you look at the defense and the improvement, it comes from coaches pushing those guys every single year. And I think every year this defense has shown improvement. The players individually have improved. And I think just generally the defense has looked more cohesive with the scheme.
Yeah, I think you've got that level of accountability and alignment kind of throughout the program, right? Like
Yeah.
it kind of starts with Gildersleeve and everything in the strength program. I love the players talking about how hard Katie O'Connor was on them with nutrition. Like she's not going to let you slide with what you put on your plate, in terms of eating to put on the weight and keep the weight that you need. And then they get that through the coaching staff, both in meetings and through practice, through all of the different things there. I'm glad you brought up the tackling stuff because another one of those stories, and I'm sure you were kind of segging into this, is OJ Burroughs, who had a great game. He's a guy that's played a lot of football at Kansas, and I thought heading into the end of last year was playing pretty well overall. He had the great game against Texas Tech. And when we talked to Brian Borland in the preseason, Brian Borland didn't necessarily buy into hey, he ended the year great, he's on the upward trend. He said, this is where OJ needs to continue to get better. And to OJ Burroughs' credit, he looked great against Lindenwood.
Yeah, and he's someone that, had a great camp with the interceptions. Someone's got to get a OJ Burroughs interception count from camp and even maybe into this year because just from pure vibe check, like seems like he had a bunch of them. And just from what we heard during camp, I thought he is someone that's primed for a really big season. I thought Marvin Grant too, playing that Cinco spot. I think he looks much more natural there than Craig Young did. I think that's really encouraging. Everything about KU, and you're like, okay, where are the spots that KU can improve? Well, it might be the fact that, so maybe Marvin Grant doesn't miss a tackle at some point and you save yourself 10 yards and a first down and force a punt in a game. Like I thought, Marvin really, really stood out to me in that role and seeing Jalen Dye play back there as well when Marvin was at the Cinco spot.
Yeah, and that safety group is so deep that it allows them to move Marvin to that Cinco spot, I think, more than he might not be able to. And I think the lack of depth at linebacker is probably part of that equation as well. But no, I really thought he looked good out there. He looked fluid. He looked physical at that Cinco spot. Like you said, I think his ability to tackle in space is going to be a big thing for them, and his ability to cover at that position, because Craig Young was a really straight line fast guy. I'm not saying he's not a great athlete because he is, but Marvin Grant, I think, is a more fluid, natural athlete from a coverage and space standpoint than Craig Young is. And so he does give you maybe a little bit more boost in that area.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you're looking for, right? I think Chris Simpson talked about this during camp. Like, we need to be more athletic on defense. So how do you do that? You take big safeties and you move them to linebacker. Like I think he was talking about, oh, that's right. I had asked him about the hawk spot and like, hey, John Kamar, former defensive back, Logan Brantley, former defensive back. And now you're moving Marvin up there. He's like, yeah, like you take big safeties and you move them to linebacker to be more athletic and you help them add the weight and get stronger over time. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you see that. And then now all of a sudden you see JB Brown and Jason Gilliam and Cornell Wheeler running around there. And you're like, okay, like you can see the vision with the athleticism there, like JB flying around, making plays, Cornell flying around, Jason, former safety, athletic. I thought the way they used the packages was really interesting. There wasn't a lot of the 3 linebacker sets. It was a lot of the Cinco. Or they really went like Cinco and nickel most of the game. So I just think the way that KU can help itself with the linebacker depth is by going Cinco or nickel from a lot of the game, because then it's Cornell and JB out there. And then if you want to rotate, Jason can come in, or if not, then you got Jason and Tywin. And I thought Tywin was doing a lot of the stuff that he was doing in 2022 when he had like 5 sacks.
Yeah.
It's like, hey man, when you're in the game, you go see ball, get ball. You go to the quarterback. You go run and blitz, because that's what everyone has said is like, hey, sometimes, he can think too much, and if you think, you act slow. And so for him, it's see ball, get ball, boom, go make plays. So I thought the linebacker stuff is just really interesting because you can see the evolution of this defense really taking place right in front of us.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense too, the way that Borland talks about them playing, right? Where he talks about how it's about us. We need to have our answers to whatever else, and it's less about what other people are running, because theoretically Kansas should have options to attack pretty much anything that other people are running. Think about all the stuff they see all through camp, with KU's offense, as Borland brings up at every single press conference. And so they do see a lot of different things, but when you have versatile, speed like Kansas is starting to get onto the field, you can answer a lot of questions.
Yeah, you can, right? Athleticism can cure a lot. And I think you're just seeing this team and this defense evolve as time has gone on. Special teams, a missed point after the first game of the season. Really? Really?
That's frustrating, because obviously last year missed extra points came back to bite them a couple times. So that part was a little bit frustrating. We'll chalk this specific one up to first game stuff, but Tabor Allen had been the most consistent of the kickers. That was the reason that they said that he had won the job, and he hit a goalpost on one of them. So
someone pointed out. Did you notice this, Kevin? I know you've watched the game back. I've not had the chance to yet. That's on my schedule of things to do. Did you notice the hold? Someone on the VIP board brought up to me that in the stadium they saw Lance laying into the the holder after that one. So I'm wondering if it was a hold thing. But
I actually did. That was one of the things that I didn't really watch the missed extra point enough to say. No, I mean, I'll me. I'll always be. If I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. What'd you say?
You're just fast forwarding, like, all right, they scored. Okay,
yeah, real quick. No, but if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know, and that's something that I don't know. I didn't watch that closely enough, but yeah, that was certainly a pretty frustrating thing. We didn't really get a chance to see any return game type stuff. Kansas didn't punt, so you didn't see the punt game. No. So there wasn't a whole lot special teams wise to watch. And so when you have that, unfortunately, a missed extra point or something stands out that much louder just because you didn't have other stuff to really talk about.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just one of those, you're like, man, it would have been great if they could have gone like a game without it. Just like, and it's not even a big deal, honestly. It's just more of like oh no, is this going to be a topic?
Yes.
Is what it goes through my head, because obviously next week against Illinois is going to be a really huge one. I guess we probably can start, like, we can spend a couple minutes looking ahead to Illinois. Do you have any other final thoughts on this game? Real quick, Kevin. Yeah. I'm sure I'll write about this a lot more in depth of like who was out there and stuff, but like, it is so interesting to see young guys out there, because you can see that they don't see the speed of the game as fast as they should. Because as soon as they went to like the 2s and 3s, when like some of those freshmen and some of the redshirt freshmen and sophomores were out there, all of a sudden it was missed tackles galore, bad angles. And I thought Luke Graham, Jaylen, one of those two, had a really good point where he's like, there's like different acclimation processes. The first one is like going from high school games to college practice. That's an acclimation process. The next one is going from college practices to college games, because it's a different pace. And I thought that was really interesting. And then I thought back to like watching some of those guys, and you're like, oh yeah, they just took the wrong angle because they didn't understand how fast this guy from Lindenwood is. Even if Lindenwood is a meh FCS team, those guys are still college football players and they're still in their 20s. Right. And it's a little bit different than when you're, 18, 19 going against guys. So,
and a guy like DJ Warner that like we've seen a ton of, obviously, from high school tape and everything else, All American Bowl. I thought he played his assignments pretty well at times last night, but like he didn't have that extra thing where it's like, okay, you played your assignment, now go make the play.
Yeah,
And so it wasn't necessarily a negative. It was just, hey, that's something that he's going to have to grow into with that comfort level where the game isn't moving quite as fast.
exactly. And that's why guys like that needed a season opener like this, just to
Yeah.
get a feel for it. And then next week, I'll really watch that snap count closely for DJ just to see are they ready to put him into a game like that, or is it plays a good amount against Lindenwood, plays a good amount against UNLV, a little bit at West Virginia, and then kind of like TCU home game is when you really start to see, the wheels start to turn for him, and I think just a lot of the other guys. Can't wait to see Job out of the cast. I think it's huge. I think it's huge.
He had one of the more impressive plays I thought last night just on rewatch where he bit too hard inside and still had the athleticism to rally and go make a play. Stuff like that is, even if it wasn't perfect, even if in tape they're going to say, hey, don't bite inside like that. It was something where you're like, he still had the athleticism to get out there. Like, that's an encouraging sign for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, we can move our way on to Illinois. Big game for KU. Saturday night at Illinois, at a Big Ten school. I am really, first of all, interested to see what the crowd's like. My dad is from Illinois, so he's going to go, and we're going to meet him there, and I'm going to see him, which is cool. But he was like, there are a good amount of tickets available on, I think, Illinois' website or secondary market. So I'm really interested to see what the crowd's like there for the game. Now, as for football, I mean, this is big boy football now. Like, I'm very excited for this one because I think we'll learn a lot about where KU's at. What's kind of the thing you'll be looking or hoping to see from KU next weekend?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a challenging game. I think a lot of fans maybe look at the way last year's game went, where Kansas jumped all over Illinois and then kind of turned into a sloppy game after that, and KU still wound up winning by double digits. But I think a lot of people look at that and they think, well, KU's going to run Illinois again. And with going up there with last year's game and the way that went, it reminds me a little bit. You remember when K-State just absolutely howitzered Missouri like 2 years ago?
Yes.
And then last year they went back to Columbia and Missouri won. I'm not saying Illinois is going to win this game, but I do think it's going to be somewhat similar, and that the two games are going to be very different. And I think, when you look at Fegan, the big running back for Illinois, I'm not sure he had really emerged a ton, by the time they had played last year.
Yeah.
And so Illinois is going to be a little bit of a different team. The interesting thing to me was KU just killed Illinois last year with speed and angles. They made those big guys play in space, and they tore them up in space. Is that something Illinois has an answer for now? I don't know. That's a fair question. I do expect it to be a closer game than it was a year ago. I think it's going to be a more challenging game. And like you said, I couldn't be more excited because it's Power 4 now conference football, but at the same time, this is a game that could tell us a lot. You remember last year when we went into this is a really long talk, but you remember last year heading into the Illinois game, and we said the Illinois game would tell the story on the BYU game because we thought BYU was going to be really physical, and we thought how KU held up physically in the Illinois game would kind of tell us about that.
Yeah,
I kind of see something a little bit similar, but not necessarily with the physicality of it, but how Kansas is going to fare on the road against West Virginia, I think we'll have a little bit better idea of that coming out of the Illinois game.
I totally agree. I think this is going to be a game that I think will feel more like a Big Ten game than last year's. Last year's felt like a Big 12 team against a Big Ten team.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of side-to-side motion. Hey, linebackers, run sideline to sideline. We're going to do this all day, and you're not going to be able to do it. I think KU will try and do that again. I know Illinois' defensive coordinator now will be in a second year with the team, so you'd think probably have a little bit better of an understanding of how to stop some of those things. And I think this will be a really great test for KU's offensive line, right?
Yeah.
Illinois' defensive line has a lot of new faces. Can you go out there and control the line of scrimmage against a front defensive front for Illinois that's got new faces right after they lost Johnny Newton.
Yeah.
And can he go do that? And then for KU's defense, I mean, I look at just a couple spots, right? Weak side defensive end. Dean,
Yep.
can you do it against Illinois? And then I look at some of the linebacker play we saw. Can you translate the athleticism to the field against a physical team? And if they can, you feel really good about that group all of a sudden, because then you would have seen the athleticism you need to play against teams that are faster. And then you would have seen them use their physicality along with that athleticism against a Big Ten team. And then you feel pretty good looking at that group, that linebacker group, if everyone stays healthy, going through the next part of the season. So I think we'll learn a lot about KU. And look, night road game. I think Leipold's talked a lot about this. That's tough because those kids wake up in the morning on Saturday and they got to watch everyone play all day. And then they got to sit and wait at the hotel and you're anxious because you want to go play. And then can you be mentally prepared at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. whenever the game starts to then go out and do it? You know, KU's offense can't have a type of lull it had at the end of the first quarter into the second quarter when there's a pick and there's a fumble.
Yeah.
You do that like you're handing Illinois free points because they'll be able to take advantage of something like that. You know, you got to make Illinois drive the length of the field, put together long drives. And so I think we'll learn a lot about KU, and I'm excited about that because I think as much as I love season openers because football is back, you just can't learn a lot from last night.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And like I said, I love the defensive tackles against Lindenwood. Are those defensive tackles going to still be dominant, still, be a major key to the defense and everything against a Brett Bielema offensive line and a 250-pound running back running behind those guys? It'll be interesting to watch.
That it will. All right, Kevin. I think that's going to do it for us here. About 40 minutes.
Yeah.
I think that's what a season opener against Lindenwood deserves. That was unremarkable. I'll plug it again. Make sure you check out our 75% off sale. Make sure you do that. It's going to be live through the end of the day on Monday, on Labor Day. So make sure you're checking it out. Fog.net. Make sure you're checking out Kevin's stuff, right, with KC Sports Network. You can find one of his podcasts, Verbal Commitment, right? That's his high school recruiting podcast. You can find Pay Heed. That's his Kansas podcast. Make sure you're checking those out. Give those a listens. Oh, my God.
I like it.
It's early, Kevin. I'm not in the habit yet of staying up till like 2:30 a.m. and getting up at 7 to work. So
you and I talked about this last night. It's week 1 for all of us, right?
I got some rust to knock off, Kevin. So thanks for knocking it off with me. Thanks as always for tuning in to the Fog.net podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave a rating and review on iTunes or your platform of choice for podcasts. As for the YouTube channel, make sure you're subscribing, liking the videos, commenting. That goes a long way in the old algorithm. Helps us find some new Kansas fans. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. We'll be back with another one midweek. We'll talk to Jeremy Warner from our Illinois website. Dive into the matchup for this week for Illinois. Thanks always for being here. We'll talk to you all soon.